한국경제TV 생생한 실전 투자 정보 와우퀴.
월 5,000원 커피값으로 투자 정보가 내 손 안에 배달됩니다. 와우킥 N에서 만나요. 주식 투자를 하다 보면 이 사람 말은 꼭 들어봐야 한다라는 전문가 있으시죠? 오늘 소개해드릴 분이 바로 월가 기술주 쪽집게로 불리는 댄 나일스 애널리스트인데요. 스탠퍼드에서 전기공학을 전공한 공학도 출신답게 반도체나 IT 기술을 꿰뚫어보는 눈이 정말 날카로우신 분입니다. 월가 애널리스트 시절부터 부동의 1위를 휩쓸 만큼 독보적인 실력을 자랑해 왔는데요. 댄 나일스 함께 모시도록 하겠습니다. 안녕하세요. 최근에 AI 버블 논란이 계속해서 제기되고 있는 가운데 댄께서는 아직 아니다라고 말씀을 해주셨습니다. 우리 시청자분들이 안심해도 될 만한 이 표현해주신 아직 유아기 단계다라는 것을 조금 더 쉽게 설명을 해주실 수 있을까요?
Sure. I think if you go back to the period of the internet infrastructure build out and you look at when Netscape Navigator came out, which was sort of the chat GPT moment back then, that happened in late 1994. And Cisco, which became the most valuable company in the world at that time, was like the NVIDIA today. And Cisco, over 6 years, saw its quarterly revenues go up about 15.5 times from the end of 94 to its ultimate peak. And that happened over a period of 6 years. If you look at NVIDIA today and you say, well, ChatGPT was kind of the mark of the beginning of this build out in AI infrastructure, that happened at the end of 2022. So we're only about 3 years into this, not the 6 years that Cisco took to build. And the revenues for NVIDIA are up 9.6 times over 3 years. Cisco's was up 15.5. So whether you want to talk about time or the amount the revenues have ramped, you're maybe about halfway through the build out that you saw back during the internet time period in the 1990s.
최근 시장이 출렁일 때마다 좀 도망치신 분들도 분명 계실 겁니다. 그런데 댄은 오히려 건강하게 이게 숨을 쉬는 과정이다라고 표현을 해주셨어요. 이건 무너지는 게 아니라는 확실한 댄만의 핵심 지표들 뭐가 있을까요?
Well, I think if you go back to the internet period in the mid 90s, one thing people forget is that Cisco, while it was climbing, in 1997, the stock went down 37% in intra-year. And in 1998, the stock also went down about 38% intra-year. But for the full year, Cisco finished up 31% in 1997 and 150% in 1998. So these kind of sharp pullbacks are pretty common when you're doing something where you're building out infrastructure as much as you are today. And the reason why I think we're sort of in the next phase potentially of ramping things up is that you had the image editing apps, Nano Banana, come out in August. Then you had a video generation app, Sora 2, come out in September. And those take 10 to 1,000 times more tokens to produce those than a simple text query. So I think we're in the early stages of both video and images starting to take off. And so you're going to have more demand coming forward. And I think the second thing is it's healthy to have people say, look, not every company is going to win. Because if you look at the history of the internet, you can see that in e-commerce, you have one big winner, that's Amazon. In search, you have one big winner, that's Google. In streaming, there's Netflix. In audio, there's Spotify. In social, there's Meta. But up until recently, people said, oh, everybody's going to do great. Everybody's going to be a winner. And so I think this is a healthy pullback where people say, well, maybe OpenAI is not going to be a winner. And we should kind of think about that and whether they can fund this 1.4 trillion in capital commitments they've made over 8 years.
이제 AI 이름표만 딱 달아서 다 오르는 시대는 끝이 난 것 같습니다. 이 껍데기뿐인 종목에 우리가 속지 않고 2026년에 진짜 수익을 낼 수 있는 종목을 고르는 기준표 뭐가 있는지 궁금합니다.
Well, I think if you look at the companies that will ultimately win and who are going to probably do the best, it's the most vertically integrated. And what I mean by that is if you look at Google, for example, Google has chips. They've been doing their TPU chips for about a decade now. So they don't have to necessarily buy NVIDIA chips at $50,000 each. They can manufacture their own at $10,000 or so, right? That's how NVIDIA has 80% gross margins. They also can go ahead and then monetize all that AI spending through search, where they show ads. They've also got the public cloud infrastructure through Google Cloud so that they can sell that to everybody else, the capacity they have. They've got devices with obviously the Pixel phone and then the Android ecosystem as well. And then potentially, most importantly, they've got 9 products with over 1 billion users each that they can use to train their AI models on. So if you look at Google, they're kind of everything OpenAI wants to be when they grow up.
Yeah.
And most importantly, arguably, Google has tremendous amount of cash flow to fund all these investments that they want to do. And so that's an example of a company that has all the different pieces to make them successful in AI. Now, that's not to mean that you're not going to have a very choppy environment this next year, because it looks like OpenAI is going to be able to raise money at an $830 billion valuation, raise $100 billion. And so you're going to have people go, oh my God, maybe that'll take some market share from Google. And so I think in 2026, you're going to see a very choppy environment, and with some big ups and some big downs as you go through this period, as people are trying to figure out who the ultimate winners are and losers. And I think, depending on the quarter, that's going to probably continue to change. But I think Google in consumer AI, for example, is going to ultimately turn out to be a winner, even if near term people start to get concerned that OpenAI is launching ads on ChatGPT, which has to take some market share, right? Because they're not showing any ads today.
최근에 보면은 오라클과 마이크론이 좀 흥미롭습니다. 주가가 엇갈리는 걸 보면서 좀 혼란스러우신 분들도 분명 계실 텐데요. 분명히 모두 AI 수요에 대해서 긍정적인 전망을 해놓음에도 불구하고 주가 흐름이 좀 달랐잖아요. 이런 현상이 이제 시장은 장기적인 약속보다는 즉각적인 현금 흐름을 우선시한다라는 신호로 해석을 해봐도 좋을까요?
Well, absolutely, because if you look at OpenAI as an example, and you say, well, they're going to do close to 20 billion in annualized run rate revenues exiting this year. But then you say, well, okay, that's 20 billion in annualized revenues, but they've made commitments for 1.4 trillion in CapEx. How are they going to fund that? And that's the problem people have with Oracle, because Oracle has a $300 billion commitment from OpenAI. And if OpenAI can't go ahead and keep growing revenues at a very fast pace, but more importantly, they're expected to lose money until 2029. So their ability to fund this is going to come from them being able to either raise money in the capital markets or the debt markets to fund all of this build out, because they're still losing a lot of money. And so that's why I said people are starting to differentiate a lot more. Whereas, for the last 3 years, the assumption was everybody could win, everybody could pay for all these commitments they made. And now, which makes sense, people are going, well, there's not an infinite amount of money out there. Not everybody will win, because that's not how it works in technology. Usually you have 1 or 2 big winners, and now you're trying to sort out who that's going to be. And in consumer, it's probably Google. And in corporate, you could say Anthropic is doing very well there. It's growing faster than OpenAI is. Obviously, it's a smaller company. But then you've also got Microsoft, you've also got Oracle, which have a very strong presence. Everybody has Microsoft Office, most corporations. And then most databases are running on Oracle. And so then you're trying to figure out, all right, where do all these other players fit in?
오라클은 대규모 데이터 센터 구축을 위해서 무려 100억 달러를 쏟아부으면서 물론 투자는 했지만 거기에 따라서 부채 부담도 굉장히 커지고 있는 상황입니다. 금리가 여전히 변수인 상황에서 이렇게나 빚을 내서하는 AI 인프라 투자가 2026년 투자자들에게는 위험 신호가 되진 않을까 걱정이 되는데요. 어떻게 보시나요?
I wouldn't mind it so much if they were, if they had these big capital commitments from another company. What concerns me is when you have it from a player like OpenAI that's losing a lot of money every year. And the only way they can fund that until you get out several years is by raising money. So that's the problem to me. It's not so much that they're spending now for revenues in the future, it's who they're spending it for that concerns me, because that makes it a very tough situation if OpenAI can't meet their forecasts.
반면에 또 마이크론인 최근 실적에서 기록적인 매출과 마진 확대까지 보여줬습니다. AI 투자 회수 ROI가 확실하다라는 것을 증명해준 셈인데요. 평소 강조하시는 실질적인 수익으로 전환하는 진짜 승자의 모습이 마이크론이라고 봐도 될까요?
Well, rather than talking about one specific company, the way to think about it is if you supply to the entire industry, and that's true if you're a graphics, a GPU vendor like NVIDIA, or a memory vendor like Samsung, a disk drive vendor, and you're supplying to everybody. All you need is for AI to continue to grow and demand continuing to grow. Because then you don't care who the winner is. You don't care if it's Google or OpenAI. You don't care if it's Anthropic or Microsoft or Oracle. Like, you just need the industry to do well. And so that's why if you're a commodity manufacturer or a semiconductor manufacturer, you just want the entire industry to grow, and you don't care about the particular company that does well. And so that's why I think you've seen the semiconductor sector do quite well. And now that Samsung can supply high bandwidth memory, I'm sure that company will do even better, because for the longest time they couldn't supply into NVIDIA, and now they can.
제가 쭉 인터뷰를 봤는데 최근 관심 종목으로 시스코를 언급을 하셨더라고요. 근데 좀 의외였던 거는 많은 이들이 성장이 정체된 가치주로 보기도 합니다. 근데 앞서 저희가 오프닝에서도 예시로 시스코를 언급해 주신 거를 제가 들었는데 특별하게 주목하신 이유가 있는지요?
Well, I mean, for me, I think the best investments are the ones where you have a high margin of safety, and people and the company's profile changes. And so if you look at Cisco coming into this year, the prior 5 years before fiscal 25, the company had grown revenues only 1% per year for about 5 years on average. That's terrible if you're a technology company. And so my belief was that Cisco would start, because they had new silicon internally and they were gaining traction with the AI companies, that you would see them have a much stronger presence with the hyperscalers. And that's what you saw this past year, where growth went from 1% over the past 5 years to they grew about 5% in fiscal 25. And I think you'll see that growth accelerate to the high single digits next year, which is very shortly. And when you look at the multiple, the S&P trades at about 26 times. Cisco trades in the high teens. And so if you have the multiple continuing to expand, where people say, well, you know what, we think it's at least as good as the average company, then you should see the stock being able to go up even more. And now you're in an upgrade cycle where you have all this data being produced for AI, but now you have to get access to it if you're a corporation. And a lot of corporations upgraded during COVID because you had to. And now you're far enough away from COVID, and you've got so much data that you're dealing with due to AI that you could see a multi-year upgrade cycle, and that should benefit Cisco.
시스코까지 들어봤습니다. 그러면은 시스코 외에 2026년 시스코처럼 시장을 주도할 만한 종목 뭐가 있을까요?
I mean, I look at a lot of different names. I'll have my top 5 picks for next year that I'm working on. I have some ideas, but this is what I would say. I think for the average investor, 2026 is likely to be a lot choppier a year for the markets with some big ups and some big downs because people are starting to differentiate, as we talked about earlier, amongst the AI trades. But I think the good news is easy money has been a big driver of the stock market. And this next year coming up, what you should see in May is a new head of the Federal Reserve appointed by President Trump, and he's going to only be appointed if he wants to cut rates again and more aggressively. And so you could see another year where it's very good in terms of the Fed trying to drive markets higher. But I think the AI trade, because you're going to see more differentiation, is going to make it more choppy. So I think if you have a broad group of stocks, not just the Magnificent Seven, not just AI related stocks, but a broader diversified group, I think that's a better place to be than focused on just a few names.
혹시 그러면은 방금 전에 탑5 종목을 생각하고 있다라고 말씀을 해주셨는데 살짝 거기에 대한 힌트도 주실 수 있을까요?
Well, I think you heard me talk about a couple of names that I like that could be there. We'll see. I'm still thinking through it. I think Cisco is a pretty good choice though, because it's defensive in that it has a low PE multiple. It has multiple years of potential growth ahead of it. So I'll just leave you with that right now and just be prepared for a lot of volatility. I mean, Charles Darwin had a great saying in that he said, it's not the strongest of the species nor the most intelligent that survives, but the one that's most adaptable to change. And I think 2026, you're going to see a lot of change as people try to figure out how to deal with a market that's getting a lot more discerning and therefore will probably get choppier.
많은 분들이 AI 하면은 관심 있는 종목이 또 엔비디아입니다. 빅테크들이 비용 절감을 위해서 그런데 자체적으로 칩을 개발하고 있어요. 뭐 구글 같은 경우에는 TPU를 만들고 있는 상황인데요. 이게 엔비디아의 파이를 뺏어가는 제로섬 게임이 될지 아니면은 전체 시장의 AI 파이가 커지는 게임 체인저가 될지 궁금합니다. 어떻게 보시나요?
Yeah, I mean, I think the good news is when you look at NVIDIA, it's actually not that expensive of a stock. It's in the high 30s multiple. And given how fast it's growing, it's valued at about half of its growth rate. And so, yes, I think as I said earlier, we're probably halfway through this AI infrastructure build out to some degree. And so I think NVIDIA can still do well, even though you've got a lot more ASICs. But again, you should never have all your money in one stock. If you pick the right stock, obviously it's great. But if you pick the wrong stock, it can be absolutely terrible. And so I think, if you own a basket of names, you have names like NVIDIA, but you also have a name like Broadcom that does ASICs, that works with Google on their TPUs, and you have a broad grouping of stocks, I think that's a lot better than just saying I'm going to own one name. If you own Cisco at its peak in 2000, if you bought Cisco at its peak in 2000, it was the most valuable company in the world because of the internet build-out. Only this past month did you get back to those levels, 25 years later.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, you can just put all your money in one stock, but some of it's going to be luck if you get it right, because at its peak in 2000, everybody thought Cisco was unstoppable and it would just keep going up. And obviously the stock's at the same place 25 years later. And so I think valuations are important. The market's expensive. You just need to keep that in mind. And as you've seen as you brought up with Oracle, or you can look at SoftBank in Japan, or you can look at names like CoreWeave, when people start to question the growth profiles, stocks can come down very fast in very short periods of time.
밸류 이야기를 해주셔서요. 밸류가 높다라고 하면은 생각나는 기업이 있거든요. 바로 팔란티어인데 제 생각에는 팔란티어 밸류에이션이 높음에도 불구하고 계속 올라가고 있어요. 팔란티어 어떻게 보시는지 궁금합니다.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Palantir is a great company.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's a great stock. Because much like Cisco in 2000 was a great company, for the next 25 years, it was a terrible stock. So that's with Palantir, you have no margin of safety because it's so expensive. And so for me, you know, if you go back, did the internet grow in 2001 and 2002? Absolutely. Did the NASDAQ go down 78% from peak to trough, with even some of the greatest companies like Amazon, whose stock went down over 90% during that period of time from peak to trough? That happened as well. So that's why for me, I'm not interested in Palantir. You know, God bless the people who owned it. You've made a lot of money, but you have no margin of safety if something goes wrong. I look at it very simply. If you lose half your money, if you're down 50%, being up 50% doesn't get you to even. You have to be up 100. So I've been through enough cycles in my life, you know, between the tech bubble or the global financial crisis, you name it, where you can see stocks go down very quickly. And if you get hit and you're in just very concentrated positions, it can take you a long time to make that back. And so for me, I focus very heavily on preservation of capital, because if you lose all your money, it doesn't matter if you're up 1,000,000%, because 1,000,000% on no money is still zero. And so that's why I try to look at things and go, what's a good risk-adjusted investment versus this is the hottest stock out there and I don't care what I pay for it in terms of valuation.
이번에 매크로 이야기로 한번 넓혀서 가보도록 하겠습니다. 연말이 다가오니까 또 투자은행들에서 연말의 목표치를 계속해서 새롭게 제시를 해주고 있습니다. 모건 스탠리 대형 은행들은 S&P 500이 8,000선을 넘길 것이다 라는 낙관론까지 나오고 있는데 대는 좀 다르더라고요. 한 10에서 20%의 조정이 나올 수 있다. It's gonna be choppy라고 계속해서 표현을 해주고 있습니다. 이 인터뷰에서도요. 2026년 연말 지수 그러면은 어디까지 갈까요?
I'm not too concerned about where it ends. I mean, for me, there's so many things. As I said earlier, I believe it'll probably end higher than where it is today because, as we talked about, the new head of the Federal Reserve that'll start in May is going to want to cut rates. So I think the market driven by easy money will probably end higher than wherever it ends this year. But I also do firmly believe it's going to be a very choppy earnings environment, because you're going to have midterm elections also coming up, and you're probably going to see more socialist-leaning politicians getting elected that don't like big business, which is going to be a much tougher political climate than what you've had so far.
최근에 AI가 주가에 좀 숨고르게 나타날 때마다 자금이 가치주 쪽으로 이동을 하고 있는데 이게 가치주로의 구조적 전환의 시작일까요? 아니면은 잠시 일시적인 피난처로 해석을 해도 좋을까요?
So I think, yes, being in these other value sectors, that's one of the reasons I liked Cisco coming into this year, and I still like it. I think being more value focused makes a lot more sense because the PE multiple for the S&P is also at 26 times. When the CPI is between 2.5% to 3%, normally on average, it's at 19 times. So this market is very, very expensive. And so if there are any problems that you see with earnings or volatility around midterm elections, where in the US, right, we've already seen it, that more of the socialist candidates are getting elected. That's not necessarily good for big business. And if people start to worry about that a lot more, you could see this year being very volatile. And it
트럼프 대통령의 정책이 그러니까 내년 2026년 인플레이션의 2차 파동을 일으킬 것이다. 그래서 좀 조심을 해야 된다라고 계속 언급을 해주셨습니다. 그러면은 이런 매크로 환경에서 금이나 은 같은 실물 자산으로 이동하면은 저희가 저희 자산을 조금이라도 지킬 수 있는 해지 수단이 될까요?
Well, I mean, gold and silver have had huge years this year. So I think, you know, telling somebody that that's a good investment now, I'm not sure that's a great recommendation. I think if you say, look, should you be diversified and commodities should be a part of your portfolio, whatever that is, and you should have some stocks, you should probably have some bonds, you should probably have some cash, you should have some value stocks, you should have some growth stocks. as I said earlier, right, the margin of safety of buying gold right here or silver isn't exactly the greatest when they're up, over 60% in gold's case, and having one of the best years since the 70s.
그럼 이번에 디지털 금이라고 불리는 비트코인은 어떻게 보세요? 이 디지털 금이라고 불리긴 하지만 사실 여전히 변동성이 큰 모습을 보여주고 있거든요. 인플레이션 해지 수단으로는 어떤가요?
No, I mean, here's the thing. You've seen it this year. Bitcoin is pretty much flat. Gold is up over 60%. Now, if you're in a third world country, is owning Bitcoin probably better than owning whatever currency? Sure. But all of those people that told you Bitcoin's a great inflation hedge, well, you've seen what it's done. And so for me, it's not, I would much rather have gold as a much bigger percentage of the portfolio. Does Bitcoin have a place in your portfolio? Yes. But if you're buying it because you think it's a good inflation hedge, how well has that worked for you this year with the most friendly president towards Bitcoin that we've ever had?
제가 대내 말 중에 가장 인상 깊었던 말이 유명한 주식과 좋은 주식을 혼동하지 말아라 라는 뼈아픈 조언이었습니다. 대내를 좋아하시는 많은 한국 투자자분들이 계시는데요. 거기에 대해서 마지막 한마디 말씀 부탁드릴게요.
Well, thank you for your love. I think the thing I would say is just you want to be adaptable to change, as Charles Darwin said. I think as you saw this past year, anybody who came into the year bullish, you felt pretty bad in March and April because things changed quickly. And then things changed quickly again when tariffs got rolled back and put on pause. So I think you just need to be very flexible in your thinking and don't get married to positions just because you hear somebody like me or anyone else telling you this is great. Remember, you've worked hard to build your net worth, and don't let it evaporate because you decided to stick it all on one stock and then get absolutely killed if it rolls over. Because as good as things look right now in AI, remember, things looked great for the internet in 2000 as well. So that's what I would say is that, be adaptable to change, be conservative. There's been a lot of money made over the last 3 years because of monetary policy. And this next year, I think, is going to be very, very choppy. And so you want to be very flexible in your thinking and adaptable to change.
그동안 이름만 보고 쫓아가던 주식들이 혹시 유명하기만 한 주식은 아니었는지 다시 한번 돌아보게 되는 시간이었습니다. 댄 애널리스트가 그려준 2026년의 지도에는 장밋빛 미래만 있는 것이 아니라 우리가 조심해야 할 웅덩이와 장애물들도 아주 선명하게 표시를 해줬는데요. 유명한 주식보다 좋은 주식을 골라라 라는 댄의 마지막 조언 가슴 깊이 새기면서 오늘 인터뷰 마치도록 하겠습니다. 함께해 주신 여러분 고맙습니다.
계속해서 다양한 경제 이슈를 알고 싶다면 구독과 좋아요, 알림 설정 부탁드립니다. AI 캐스터 권미정이었습니다.